you get?
I think you're right. There's been certainly a bit of shifting from emerging markets in general, including India, into developed markets for obvious reasons. India has some domestic issues regarding corruption and inflation worries, whereas in developed markets, particularly the US, you're obviously seeing economic data improving. So there's been a natural shift, I think, from the emerging market inflows we saw last year into outflows, and particularly into developed markets. I guess the question for everyone on the foreign investor side is whether that will continue. I think once people can get their head around the authorities and the central banks being able to control inflation, I think you'll have more of a reversal in those flows back into India emerging markets. But until they can prove they can do that, I think the outflows could continue for a while longer.
What's the bigger threat? Is it the ETF money which came in 2010, part of that going out, or do you think a lot of re-weighting is starting to happen, and that's what you sense in the sales stairs, that many of the global funds have scaled down or are in the process of scaling down their India weightages?
I think if you look at the general, the sell side strategist view for the globe this year, I think you're seeing a consensus, the consensus being away from emerging markets into developed markets. I think the global asset allocators are moving in that direction. And for them, I think it's a safer bet for them to make, to be in developed markets, which seem cheaper. Where obviously places like the US where rates obviously remain quite low, for them to make, if you like, a safer bet. I think that's what's going on. Some of the ETF type flows you saw last year are clearly unwinding as well. And I think, as I said before, it's a general sense of uncertainty around emerging markets now, which I think is scaring off some international investors. And I think what's happening is that, given the fact emerging markets and the risk premium was being dissipated to some degree, I think what you're seeing is an increasing amount of risk premium coming back into emerging markets, whether it be inflation in Asia or whether it be political worries in the Middle East. I think people are repricing some of that risk and therefore re-asset allocating as a consequence.
Having said that, your point is taken about the view on emerging markets versus developed markets, but India seems to have been singled out for punishments in the start of the year. I mean, our underperformance compared to even neighboring markets like Korea has been very, very stark.
I think that's correct. I think there's probably two things going on there. One is that the Indian market had done extremely well last year. The valuations clearly got a little bit stretched. I think there's an Indian story there, and particularly some domestic worries as well. I mentioned before inflation and certain aspects of corruption. I think on the other aspect, places like Korea, Taiwan, Northeast Asia in general are doing better because they're quite export-led, so therefore geared into a US recovery. And also they're cheaper, so Korea 10, 12 times earnings, some very, very good companies in Korea trading quite cheaply. And potentially what investors are saying is that if I'm going to be in Asia, I want to be in cheap markets that are exposed to the US, rather than more expensive markets, a bit more cyclical. I think we're seeing some of that switch within Asia towards those Northeast Asian export-led markets.
Stay on, Rakesh. We'll have many more questions just coming back to you in a bit. Meanwhile, just touching base with the market, which is trading at